And giving Steve Anderson a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
And with that, let me tell you what's been going on in Topeka, because you don't hear the whole story if you read the papers. But I'll give you a little example. The governor asked me to write a little editorial about what we had done in the time that I had been here, because my agreement with the governor had always been that I could only serve for 2 or 3 years. And so the governor said, I would like you to put out all the things we've accomplished and write an editorial. We'll submit it to the Wichita Eagle and the Kansas City Star, which we did. We didn't hear back from the Eagle. We did hear from the Kansas City Star. The Kansas City Star said, well, we'll print it, but we want to print the hometown of your budget director, basically to show that I was an out-of-state hired gun. Of course, they don't know my background. I was a proud native son of the state of Kansas, and I can probably tell every one of the editors there more about the state of Kansas than they'll ever know. So, I responded to him and said, well, that's fine, but I would hope then every time you run an editorial on Kansas, you will tell where that editor that wrote the editorial lives, because they all live in Missouri. And I said it might even be more instructive to your audience to tell them where the owners of your paper live, which is California, which might give you a little idea when you read the editorials why they are so out of touch. Winston Churchill once said that a lie will get halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. In modern society, it's become worse than that. A half-truth will be around the world before you have a chance to even answer to that half-truth. And part of what I see is that you see hidden editorials in news articles because you see half the story. They pick and choose data sources. There's non-reporting of relevant variables and facts. And misinformation is given legitimacy because other news entities pick up these stories as if they're fact and then cite those news stories. Here's some numbers you've heard. $510 million hole in the budget. That's when we came in. This is the headlines that I was greeted with. That the state will have to make up a $327 million projected shortfall in its 2014 fiscal year. That's, of course, because of our terrible policies. Our slashes in are $3.7 billion over 5 years, with state fiscal analysts projecting $2.5 billion. $250 million of that was in the first 6 months of this year. Now, these are numbers they've all trotted out there. Here's the before and after. Here's what I walked into. $876.05 in the last fiscal year that closed just before we came in. The projected $500 million budget. Unemployment rate, second highest tax burden, and most of our counties, a large number of our counties, had significant population declines over the last decades. Here's what it was on August 5th. Cash balance, $587.8 million. Projected surplus, and this is a conservative amount. I expect us to do better than that because we have exceeded the monthlies. 509. Now, where's this deficit? Why isn't this being reported? You'd say this should be a headline. State doesn't have $237 million deficit. They've got an excess. That's an $800 million swing. Unemployment rate has fallen. Of course, you can point to the national economy, although compare us to how much ours has fallen to some of the states like New York, and I think you'll see that we've done quite a bit better. Our tax burden is the second lowest in the region, and we are well on our way to being the lowest in the region. Job growth and population growth figures. None of this is getting reported. I doubt if you've read any of this. And what did the first 6 months of the tax cut really cost? There's the calculation. So that's what it should have been. That's what it actually came in at, was $2.9 billion over the $2.8 it should have been. So excess revenue was $125.9 million. So what did the tax cut really cost us? Instead of $248 million, it cost us $122 million. Here's another little thing that you probably haven't read in the paper, and this was in the op-ed that I sent to the papers. Who's winning the border wars? Son of a gun, is it high taxes or low taxes? I think you can read that. All the employment that in the metro area was on the Kansas side. Is that any surprise? when all you have to do is move across State Line Road? Now, and I've had some people go, well, there's small businesses moving over. They're not paying any income tax. How are we profiting from that? Well, I guarantee you they're either buying a building or renting a building. They're probably bringing employees with them. I know there was a medium-sized CPA firm that moved over, and I think it was 25 employees or 25 CPAs and 70-some staff. Well, those people are paying W-2. And I think once they get on the Kansas side of the border, they'll realize they're on the right side. I'm guessing none of you have seen that stat. But certainly when I sent my op-ed in, I sent the citation from a third party for every one of this is, I believe, BEA staff. But they were provided citations. They print a lot of editorial numbers that they don't have citations to. Here's some inconvenient truths. The tax cut has put more money in the pockets of wage earners. Now, we didn't see the impact that I think we would have got if the Social Security tax wouldn't have gone up. It went up at the same time our tax came down, and they largely offset each other. So if you lived in another state, you actually saw a reduction in your paycheck. We managed to keep the paycheck level for Kansans. Eliminating small business income taxes encourages and supports business expansion and hiring. Well, who doesn't understand that except people who have never met a payroll out of their own pocket? And I just have never understood the assault on small business, but it is out there. You see it over and over, and it's implied that our tax cuts somehow benefited the rich. I wish they would get out and talk to a few CPAs and tax attorneys for the returns they prepare. All the highway construction projects are on schedule. Remember, supposedly we raided KDOT, and boy, things were going to shut down. Every one of them is on schedule. We're building a state-of-the-art crime lab, which has been needed for a long time. If you'd been to the crime lab, you'd be amazed that the defense attorney hadn't gone down there and questioned every bit of work they did. The forensic scientists that they were losing at the KBI lab on a regular basis because the feds pay more, now will be adjunct professors at Washburn teaching a CSI class. And while they'll get a little additional salary, they're also going to get the sweater vest. The 2014 budget has an ending balance that exceeds the statutory requirement. Of course, why worry about the statutory requirement? The last administration sure didn't. That $876.05 I quote on cash balance doesn't tell the whole story, because we are very embarrassingly one of the few states that's a cash balance state. Most states do what we call accrual, which if you spend something in June, even if the check isn't written, that's when the expense is recorded. Well, we have $200 million that we don't record that is supposed to be a June expense that we pay in July on school financing. So really, we were in the hole by about $200 million. That little inconvenient truth hadn't been told. And the K-12 part of the budget is increased by $230 million in FY 2014. Boy, you sure haven't heard that, have you? Now, I was the first CPA to sit in the budget office. So maybe I'm the first one to understand this. It's nice to use the official third party as your guideline, but if you use them, you find out that the media reports that we reduce K through 12 funding are not the truth. It is their version. It's what the media and the court said. Now, I will tell you, 80% of our school districts in this state don't even have a balance sheet. My firm audits a number of school districts, and there is not, to my knowledge, one school district that is fully GASB and GAAP compliant. They use what we call OCBOA, other comprehensive basis of accounting. What's wrong with that is you can't compare one school district to another school district, and you certainly can't cross state lines and compare them. You lose transparency and comparability. That is a license to be inefficient. And it's also a license to steal. If you want to find where most of your corruption occurs, it's in those states that have the worst accounting. Boy, I really got a taste of how it works when it came to the arts. Now, there was a great positive for the arts. It sucked so much air out of the room in Topeka the first year we tried to eliminate funding that they hardly noticed anything else we were doing. That $750,000 on the arts, you'd have thought we were shutting the whole state down. If that $750,000 generates that much, why don't we just take the whole budget and dump it in the arts? Yeah. Look what it creates. They didn't mention, and this is one of the things that we made clear, is that we could take 42 children off the developmentally disabled waiting list with that money. Well, they'd rather spend it on arts because at some point we've got to have the argument about essential and non-essential functions of government and focus our money on the essential and take the money from the non-essential and give it back to the citizens. You would have thought if you read the articles on the $2 billion error that was made on the chart the governor had, that I was right in there. And it probably was my number. The bloggers and the leftist sites picked it up and said, well, this is exactly the way that the conservatives work. They manufacture and give improper numbers, and it was just used to discredit the governor and I. Now, let's talk about what they didn't report and what they did know. Here's what they knew. Here's the email. The mistake I made was believing that when I walked in, the numbers that had preceded my arriving in office, because remember this was a 2010 number, were correct. Now if you look, they knew my number was right in the governor's budget book, because the budget book is what I turned out. Now after this happened, I made sure that no numbers of my predecessor were ever used again, and let me show you why. What the press didn't report. And simply asking me or asking my staff, how could this have happened? We could have given them the explanation and certainly pointed them some things they haven't reported that are in the public domain. And you haven't heard about any of these things, I'm guessing. A little background on what I found when I walked in. Mr. Gosen is the only, Dwayne Gosen, who preceded me and now is head of KHI, one of the liberal think tanks. He's the only individual that's been named any of the state indictments by the SEC for how bad the numbers were. Now, what does that tell you when Illinois and New Jersey, they named no individuals, but yet when they indicted Kansas? Do any of you even know that the state of Kansas had an SEC indictment? You haven't heard that reported, have you? Because it reflects on the Sebelius administration. It was a 2008 bond issue. What do we do about it? Well, I tell you, the facts are on our side. You know, and I very seldom am a big fan of regulatory groups, especially the feds. But I think that we should embrace the SEC enforcement of GASB and GAAP. I think the SEC's foray into the municipal securities bond market is welcome, because I think it's time we started getting comparability. Because it is so important when we think about it. Remember Jefferson's concept of how the republic would work. 13 states that would, all have their own experiment. And that experiment, if it worked in that state, then the other states could emulate. Well, if you don't have comparability, how do you know if it's working? How do you know what it really costs for $1 of a Medicaid recipient? You don't, because you can't compare the way we do business in each state. And I think the SEC entering into this, now using GASB and generally accepted accounting principles as the rules, I think is very welcome.
Stephen J. Anderson, our friend of Kansas.